G'day, and welcome back to Pushing 50. This evening's episode is recorded just after part 2. Part 3 is about a total engine failure, which, unlike part 2, this one is an obvious engine failure. This was during my training with my instructor, and with the 1940s Tiger Moth, when you're doing training, the best course of action is to teach people about spins and fully developed spins. So this was going to be my first fully developed spin in a Tiger Moth. So we are at Cessnock Airport, just to the east of the airport on what's called the dead side of the circuit area. And we're climbing through 3.5 to 4,500 feet. And I've been briefed fully on a fully developed spin. So as we reach 4,500 feet, we let engine temps equalise, etc., go into some straight and level flight and just do some orbits out to the east of the aerodrome. And continual patter from my instructor, who is telling me what to expect, how we're going to enter this fully developed spin, as opposed to recognising the stall. Recognising the stall is slowly raising the nose until the wings lose lift and you start to descend. So the wings have stopped producing lift and you descend. A fully developed spin is where you enable the wings, one wing, to drop and then enter into a spin. So I've been fully briefed on this particular manoeuvre in the Tiger Moth and what to expect, but this is my first time experiencing. So we're at around 4,500 feet above sea level, so plenty of height, and this is before the step was introduced, the step being an extra level or restriction in level from Williamtown Airport, which is a RAF base and commercial airport in just north of Newcastle. So these days they're restricted to a lower limit on that particular side of the airport. This was before that happened. So we're at 4,500 feet. We've done a few orbits to only about maybe a mile or two east of Cessnock Aerodrome, and we've finished an orbit. We're facing into the wind. We've pulled the throttle back and we're raising the nose and we're raising the nose and we're raising the nose until we get to a point where the wings lose lift or a stall occurs. At that stage, to introduce a spin, rudder is introduced, and at this stage, left rudder for a spin to the left was introduced. And when I put my hand like that, that's sort of the angle that the plane actually takes. At that moment in time, when we've introduced the left spin component of the stall, I'm looking out the front. I'm in the back seat, instructor's in the front seat, and it's a relatively fresh engine, so it's still nice and tight. It's got lots of compression. It's not a tired old engine at all. And the propeller is going around and went thump and stopped on a compression stroke. So literally we're there, we've initiated the spin, and bang, the engine stops. So if you've ever heard a Tiger Moth or any aircraft, they're very loud. We're going at a slow speed, so there's not much wind noise. We've got our headsets on, etc. So it's literally like dead silence. The vibration from the engine, which we normally feel through the airframe, completely disappeared, and that propeller has stopped. Now, to my surprise, the reaction from my instructor was, "Oh, That's inconvenient. Meanwhile, in my mind, I'm going, inconvenient? The engine's just stopped. And his next words were, I'm going to have to brief you on an air start. I'm like, well, hang on a minute. This is supposed to be my training for my first experience of a fully developed spin in a Tiger Moth. Bang, engine stopped, propeller is dead still, and he's immediately then pushed forward on the stick, which stops us from going into a fully developed spin, opposite rudder to stop that wing drop that occurs. Some of you who have flown planes or know a little bit about planes will understand what I'm talking about. But he's caught the aircraft and adapted best glide, which is 60 knots in a Tiger Moth. So in the blink of an eye, he's fixed all of these problems. And we're now flying again. We're not in a stall. We've regained lift in our wings. We're now in a glide which is around about 500 feet per minute. From 4,500 feet, that gives us 9 minutes before we reach ground level. All well and good, or just under, because Cessnock Airport's 211 feet above sea level. It's just shy of 9 minutes. So here we are, and the propeller has stopped. We're in this glide, and he immediately says, you have control. And it's a challenge and response technique to know who is flying the plane. Automatic response from me is, I have control. So I take over control of the aircraft, and we're in a glide, and I maintain that 60 knots, which gives us approximately a 500 foot per minute descent. He then spends the next, probably 45 seconds to a minute. Firstly, took only 5 seconds. He didn't even give it a care in the world about our predicament, because we're just next to the airport. He said, we're fine. What we're going to do is give you a fly of the aircraft without the engine and the propeller running, and the propeller is stopped, so you can feel the difference in a glide with the propeller stopped as opposed to rotating or windmilling, because a windmilling propeller creates a lot of drag, and you actually have to have a steeper nose attitude to maintain your 60 knots of speed, best glide in a Tiger Moth, or 58 knots, some people could argue. So he's explained that in 10 to 15 seconds, no problems at all. He then says, what we're going to do now is called an air start, which I'll go into detail in a moment. If the air start fails to occur, then you will have control again, and you will glide us back to the airport and land us back at the airport. Dead stick, meaning that the engine is not operational, etc. So an air start. An air start is where you point the aircraft at, or the quickest way to pick up speed is at a vertical component. So it's actually just past vertical of the fuselage, and we will point the aircraft straight down at the ground, build up speed, and the propeller should start turning again. Now, this is a relatively new engine, so it's a relatively tight engine. Tight being the compression is still high, which means it takes a little bit more force to turn that propeller over. So we are just seconds after finishing that briefing. He's pushed the aircraft into a nose down attitude. Same taking over, handing over procedure was done. So he has control of the aircraft. We have gone to just past vertical, and we're going straight down at the ground, very quickly losing height from what was previously around 3,800 feet down to 3,500 feet. In that 300 feet, he's pushed the aircraft straight down at the ground. Our airspeed has gone from 60 knots up to 100 knots, 110, 120. That propeller is pushing ever so slightly against that compression stroke in the engine, but it's not turning over. 135 knots. It's struggling. 140 knots straight down, and that propeller has kicked over. Instantly, the engine is refired. He's already got it back at the idle, and then we've slowly pulled out of that dive. That dive took around about 1,200 feet. So we've gone from 4,100 feet down to around 3,000 feet, maybe a little bit lower, but not much. And the engine started, and we've done a gradual pull out to maintain a constant roughly 3 Gs. G-forces being the weight that you feel from gravity. So I was at that stage 100 kilos or thereabouts. Forgive me if I'm lying a little bit, but I felt 300 kilos heavy in the seat, and we've gradually pulled out. We've pulled out with more than enough time to be well with above circuit level. Circuit level is 1,000 feet above ground. So we're back into straight and level feet by just over 2,000 feet, at which time immediately there's no time from handing over and my automatic response, because I've been trained with this handing over, taking over procedure, is taking over. And I'm now back in control of the aircraft as the speed comes back through drag from a very draggy airframe, being a Tiger Moth, which is a biplane with lots of wires and other bits and pieces, and the drag takes over. We get back to about 80 knots, which is our straight and level cruising speed. Adjust the throttle for 2,050 RPM, and we're happily flying again. And he goes, well, okay, let's go and land. So reduce the throttle, come back in, join crosswind from east to west above the 1.7 threshold, which is the northern end of the airfield, and then turn on to downwind, and then the normal radio calls resume. Traffic Cessnock, Double Echo India, Tiger Moth, turning base, runway 35, Cessnock. And then turn base and on to finals. We don't do a finals call at this particular airport. It's just an agreement with all the training facilities so we can free up the radio airspace for other important calls. And we land, and then we taxi back to the hangar. So back on the ground now. Lesson is not over. There's a debrief involved, so we go through exactly what's happened, why it's happened, and what we did, and basically recap on every component of what we've done during what I consider to be an engine failure. However, it was an eye-opening experience, and it was an engine failure, but it was obvious engine failure. Not obvious to a novice like me, but obvious to a seasoned instructor, where he knew exactly what had happened. And it was due to several components which I'm forbidden from talking about in regards to how to stop a propeller in a Tiger Moth. Those of you watching this may actually figure out why the engine stopped. I doubt it, but if you do, please message me. So that was the most eye-opening experience that I'd had to that point in time in my aviation career, which was a short career, but let's call it thousands of flights and hundreds of hours. So if you've enjoyed that, please stay tuned for part 4 of it is part 4 of the aviation series of Pushing 50. Thanks again. Peace and g'day. We'll see you tomorrow.